and welcome to the channel. First and foremost, thank you very much to the sponsors. I really appreciate your generosity. I really appreciate your contribution to this channel. It is you who make it possible to film. In fact, you are the only reason that I'm continuing to produce these videos. So thank you very much indeed. Since, much to my surprise, the previous video on the 80-gun ships from David Stew's set of plans proved so popular, I decided to make a few more videos for some of the vessels that he depicts. Part of the reason is that, after all, this is not so easily found book. There are only 500 reprints, and heaven knows how many have survived from the 19th century. It is not exactly something that is in every shipmodeler's library. So, I would like to talk a little bit about the treasures that are hidden in this book. And today, I have decided to talk about something horribly ugly. These are the famous or infamous, depends on your point of view, sloops of war, the Dart and the Arrow. There are a couple of reasons why I want to talk about them. First of all, the Napoleonic period was a period of quite a lot of experimentation. Pretty much everybody and their grandfather decided that they can innovate and that innovations are necessarily a good thing. And of course they're not. And some modifications were useful. They were actually needed. They modified the way ships were framed. Part of the reason behind it, of course, was not so much absolute lack of timber as relevant, or the prices of the timbers had increased to the point where it was no longer viable to continue building the same old way when you need to have a navy that is a few thousand ships strong. Others were innovations in rigging, innovations of maintenance of the vessels, of arming ships. Quite a lot of experimentation happens at this tail end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century. But among them was also a truly weird design for very shallow drafted sloops that were supposed to have all sorts of advantages. And there are two reasons why I'm talking about it. The one is obviously the vessels themselves. There is no polite way to describe it. They are ugly. They are ugly even to my eyes, let alone to contemporary skippers. They were absolutely hated at the time. Although, strangely enough, especially looking at them, they did their job quite well. They proved to be rather successful vessels, although the design was never repeated after these. The second reason that I want to talk about them is, as many other people, I am a great fan of the novels of the late, much lamented Patrick O'Brian. And these vessels, the Dart and the Arrow, were the inspiration for the fictitious vessel Polycrest, which Jack Aubrey commands in the second of the novels, Post-Captain. And politely, the Polycrest was referred to as the Carpenter's Mistake. Although the stories of the Arrow, Dart, and Polycrest are different, the two sloops designed by General Bentham, trust an army officer to design something like this, were always intended to be just sloops of war. Nothing more, nothing less. There was no great secret weapon that they were supposed to carry, while the fictitious equivalent of this vessel, Polycrest, was supposed to have mounted some especially strange weapon that, of course, never worked out, probably some kind of a Congreve rocket, as is described in the novels. Designed by an army officer, General Bentham, they are atrociously ugly. There are a couple of interesting elements about these vessels, and some of these elements we hear also described in Patrick O'Brian's novel as characteristic of Polycrest. The one is that, for all practical purposes, these vessels had no bilges because they have nearly flat, rounded bottoms. In fact, if you look at the body plan of the vessel here, they look an awfully lot like a modern sailboat. The more classical version of sailboat, rather than the atrocities that have been designed in the last few years, specifically to provide maximum real estate for display of crew, and that look great at the dock as long as you keep the boat at the dock rather than take her out sailing. So from the previous period, when sailboats were still intended to be sailed, you will see that the shape of the hull is very, very similar to yachts from anywhere from the later 70s through the 2000 or thereabouts. On this photograph here of the section, it is particularly clear that there is no deep V of the bilges of the bottom. And this is something that sailors absolutely hated because they were not used to this. And because, as a matter of fact, it would have been problematic for the pumps to pick up the water from there, rather than throw it all over. These two vessels were very, very shallow drafted. And to compensate for this, they actually had centerboards, which at the time were called drop keels. The drop keels, while absolutely hated by the sailors at the time, and believed to be leaky and to be something horrible and unused for, and therefore a crime against sailors, truth of the matter is that these keels allowed vessels to get very close to shore and to operate very restricted waters. So in this sense, the two vessels were highly successful, unlike the fiction of Polycrest, which was nothing but a carpenter's mistake. These two vessels, much against the grain of contemporary sailors, actually proved rather good. They were fast, they were reasonably weatherly, they had such a shallow draft that they could get really close to shore, especially on the Atlantic shores of France, in restricted waters, and not surprisingly, because of all of these characteristics, they were employed mostly in cloak and dagger operations. Picking up spies, dropping off spies, supplying rebels against the revolution in France, extracting victims of the revolution, all this sort of James Bond style operations. This is exactly what proved to be the bread and butter of both the Dart and the Arrow. And they excelled in this, which, however, did not make them loved by anyone. So what are the weird characteristics? Look at the stern. Nowadays we are going to be less shocked by this, but this is a complete departure from any and all contemporary vessels. It looks like nothing at all. And in a matter of fact, this is a vessel that is good 200 years ahead of its time, really, to be truly appreciated. Then there is the centerboard, and you can see it here in the midship section at the bulkhead. You can see how it is protruding through the very shallow keel. That would have improved, of course, dramatically. Well, it would have operated exactly the way centerboards operate on modern vessels. That would have allowed them to sail close to the wind. It would have allowed them also to get off in shallow waters. The other thing that is rather interesting are the diagonally planked bulkheads. They are waterproof. They were intended to be waterproof. They were intended to prevent vessels from getting flooded. The bow, by comparison with the rest of the vessel, the bow is looking almost conventional. Although, needless to say, there were negative comments about it too. For one thing, there is no traditional head in that area. As is visible on the drawing, it is ball-headed. It has no beakhead. It has no bulkhead at the beakhead. It is round bow with just a knee supporting the bowsprit that is fit to the deck. Then the rake, it is such a shallow curvature and such a long rake. Again, it reminds us of modern sailing yachts. Well, fairly modern. Modern for an elderly man like me, basically. But these were things that were way ahead of their time, which all of this contributed both to their undeniable characteristics and also for the sailors' hatred for them. But to me, these vessels will always be the inspiration for Polycrest and Master and Commander Jack Aubrey's final sloop war under his command. With this, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a most pleasant rest of the day. I hope to see you next time. Thank you very much for watching, and especially big thank you to the sponsors. Goodbye.